On today's show, Jefferson-Chalmers has a new community-driven plan to redevelop this historic corner of Detroit's East Side. We dive in. Welcome to your Daily Detroit for Monday, August 10th, 2020. I'm Jer Stays. Josh Elling of Jefferson East and Derric Scott of the East Jefferson Development Corporation join us to talk about the master plan that was recently completed there. It's a big vision that includes everything from housing to groceries to even the Vanity Ballroom. But before we get into that, a couple of quick housekeeping things. First, we have a new Dial a Podcast and voicemail service. That's right, you can now leave a message for the show that we might play on the air. Plus, this twist, you can now call in and listen to the most recent or second most recent episode of the show. That way, you don't even need a smartphone to hear the podcast. Big time thanks to engineer Randy Walker for working on this and making it possible. You can leave feedback, ideas, or story suggestions at 313-789-3211. Services like this are only possible thanks to the funding of our members. You can join them at patreon.com/dailydetroit. And thank you. All right, the next voice you're going to hear is that of my colleague, Mr. Sven Gustafson.
Josh Elling and Derric Scott, welcome to Daily Detroit. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you are releasing the Jefferson-Chalmers Main Street Master Plan, as it's called. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in this document. One of the tabs, though, talks about the master plan's vision, which seems to me like as good a place to start as any. Can you kind of broadly talk about the vision for redeveloping Jefferson-Chalmers here?
We get asked a lot, what is the vision for this area, for the corridor? And the thing that we continue to say is that our vision is the community's vision for what development looks like in this area. And so one of the things that we're looking forward to highlighting on Thursday evening during our master plan presentation to the community is this vision that's been laid out by the community that really highlights a few key nodes and some guiding themes that residents have brought forward and community members have said. These are things that we find important and valuable for development as it happens in this area. Mm-hmm. One of the big things that's continued to emerge is just this unique identity of the Jefferson-Chalmers neighborhood. You have this really cool community that is on the far east side of Detroit, right, adjacent to the river, just before you cross the Grosse Pointe border, bordering East Jefferson corridor. And you're literally a half a mile from the Detroit River. And it's one of the few communities or neighborhoods in Detroit where you can actually access the river from the actual neighborhood. And so residents, just kind of playing on the history of the corridor and the historical assets, really want to make sure that this is a unique place that doesn't look like anywhere USA or just any other commercial corridor with nice, pretty buildings, but really has some historical character, some historical context that reflects the values of the community, but as we all know, allows for development to happen in a way that it attracts people from all over the region. And so, the larger vision here is to build in density, to make sure that happens in an inclusive way that doesn't displace existing Detroit residents or existing businesses, but also supports growth, local entrepreneurship, as well as providing opportunities for other regional draws and regional opportunities to come into the area and provide amenities for this neighborhood.
And you're talking about building in density and character and everything. There really is a lot of different sort of elements to this master plan, right? I mean, this encompasses everything from building new retail to new housing, right down to things like building out enhanced crosswalks, better ways, safer ways for people to get across the streets a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about the broad sweep of this document and what's all in there?
The goal was to really look holistically at the corridor and its assets. And so while we didn't focus on the entire Jefferson-Chalmers neighborhood, it really focuses on the East Jefferson Avenue commercial corridor and sort of the neighborhood immediately adjacent. So we started Alter Road and sort of go from Alter Road at the east, west about just a little over a half mile to Lenox, just west of Riverbend Plaza. And so there's corridor improvements and enhancements that are focused on, and these are improvements in the right of way, things as simple as sidewalk enhancements and improvements to pedestrian crossings where bus stops go in as part of the city's larger plan and strategy to make sure that there's infrastructure improvements that make sure that as development happens, the right infrastructure is in place. And then there's this sort of above and beyond. What are some of these amenities like gateway, arcs and things that show that you've arrived in Jefferson-Chalmers, wayfinding. So all those things are things that the community was able to provide input on, pocket parks, green space, as well as priority development sites. So physical built developments, mixed use developments, where it makes the most sense for those developments to go, what type of amenities go in them, as well as what the scale of it looks like, what is the character of those developments. And then lastly, from a larger perspective, what are some of the overarching amenities that the corridor ultimately wants to see? And so I think we said this last time on the show, where we've tried to sort of allow this exercise to play is we already know the what, which is all the market capture that can happen in this area from perspective of how many units can be built to how much retail square footage can be absorbed. And now we want to go out to the community, and this process allowed us to say, how do we deliver on that? What does it look like? What type of amenities fill in these retail categories, from a grocery use all the way down to a service entity such as a salon or a dry cleaner? All the things that sort of comprise the plan to help us set the vision across the entire corridor of where these things go. There's a historic core, which is sort of the center of the corridor where the historic Vanity Ballroom is, which is a tremendous asset in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
That historic core is sort of saying, these are existing buildings that we'd like to see preserved and that historic value preserved. And then on, the eastern end and the western end of the corridor, there's opportunities for new development and more infill that complements the character of that historic core and then supports it as well.
If I could add on that, something that's really interesting is that, Jefferson East has been working to revitalize the Jefferson-Chalmers Business District since 1994. And we had done with the community planning efforts before. So we did the streetscape plan, we did traditional Main Street zoning overlays, we did, design districts, all of that good stuff. But what was really unique about this opportunity, it was a chance for us to go back and really connect with our neighbors in Jefferson-Chalmers to determine what they wanted to see in that geography and pull together, previous planning efforts, test to see if they were still valid, and then pull in all the amenities that really make the Jefferson-Chalmers Business District a unique place in the region that can attract all the investment that Derric's talked about, but also then vetting that to make sure it's in alignment with the community's current vision.
You mentioned the Vanity Ballroom, which is kind of the signature building in Jefferson-Chalmers, abandoned for many years. However, what is the vision for that building, or the plan, I should say, for that building, and how will you kind of pull that off?
Yeah, so we've heard some really great feedback from the community about the Vanity Ballroom. And the one thing that stayed constant over the years is that people want to make sure that the Vanity Ballroom is accessible in some way, form, or fashion to the public, whether it's as an entertainment venue or as some type of functional space for activity to kind of activate it, whether it's used as like a community center, as a entertainment hall, ballroom, dance, music venue, whatever it winds up being. Folks just want to make sure that it's preserved and used in that way. So what we do know is 30,000 square foot ballroom. The first floor is 15,000 square feet that will have retail with a strong anchor restaurant tenant. The second floor, where the old ballroom dancing floor is, which is a really cool spring loaded floor. And by spring loaded, the architect designed it in a way where you've got these wood beams that give as weight is on it. And so it gives the impression that it's a bouncing floor.
Wow.
And so, if you watch the old movies where they were dancing the girls off the floor and looked like they were bouncing and twirling, they were cheating a little bit. They had some help from, these spring loaded floors. And so it's a really, cool ballroom that the public would like to see it come back to life and be activated in that way. So what we know will happen is, in the next year or so, we are planning to secure the roof, which we need to finish raising funds for the roof and the facade stabilization. And then over the next year, we'll be going through a more intensive deep dive with the community, specifically on the Vanity, to talk about the future programming and development of it, and then trying to attract the right development partner to come in and execute on that.
And so what was really unique about the master planning process is it not only allowed individuals to say, hey, I would like to see a community space on the second floor of the Vanity Ballroom. It would also like us to say, okay, if we want to have a community space, that would have this ability to produce revenue, here's how that would impact the development strategy for this building. So in a lot of ways, the master planning process not only served as a powerful tool for engagement and determining what the community vision was, it also served almost an education process to show how development works, the challenges of rehabilitating these old buildings, the amount of effort that goes into putting in the complicated finance stack. And we were able to do that for building after building up and down Jefferson there in the Jefferson-Chalmers business district.
And I think I see that there's still plans for attracting a new anchor grocery store.
One of the big demands for the area continues to be grocery. We know that that's one of the largest areas where we're losing a lot of capture, where if people have to get in their car, they're not driving 5 minutes away, they're driving 15, 20 minutes away up to sort of the 8 Mile Woodward area to where the Meijer and all the shops are up there or out of the community. And so one of the things we want to make sure as we deliver grocery, again, we know the grocery is the what, but now we've asked that question of, how do we deliver that? What does it look like? Is it a Meijer? Is it a Whole Foods? Is it a community co-op? And those are things that we've started to get a good deal of feedback from the community. And I won't say surprising, but one of the things that was kind of eye-opening was this, mixed feedback about when we see grocery and usually think of somebody like Whole Foods in a neighborhood like Jeff-Chalmers, we immediately think, gentrification. That's not what people in this community want. And surprisingly enough, we had so many community residents that highlighted the values of fresh fruit and produce like Whole Foods and stores like that. And so from what comes in with grocery, it'll definitely be a mixed use development that has some grocery, but also provides a strong anchor for some other retail. We know that there are certain qualities that community members really value in a grocery user and other types of users that come into this area. And so that's what we'll be targeting and going after to try to find the right user that can fill that grocery space and really deliver on the needs of the neighborhood.
So this is almost a year after you first started, holding these community meetings with all the neighbors there in Jefferson-Chalmers to talk about what they wanted out of their neighborhood. In the meantime, here comes the coronavirus pandemic. We already heard the news recently that Alma's Kitchen, which was the name of the Mexican Asian fusion restaurant, would not be opening in Jefferson-Chalmers because of the coronavirus, disrupting its business plans and everything. So I'm just wondering, does it complicate things for you or not really?
So, it does a little bit of both. It sort of complicates things and then it validates some things. So one of the things that it helps to validate is just this demand for quality, affordable housing, right? And much of the plan calls for mixed income housing, both a combination of market rate and affordability. And we know there's a driving increase in a driving demand for having affordable quality housing. There's a few low income tax credit projects in this neighborhood that expire in the next 2 years that has the potential to turn anywhere from 80 to 120 units from affordable units into market rate units potentially, or they may go offline. And so there's a strong need to preserve, these affordable units and provide people with opportunities to have quality housing. The other thing that is validated is, just access to services and amenities within your neighborhood that's within walking distance.
Mm-hmm.
So at the height of the pandemic, back in March and April, there was a couple week period where Department of Transportation wasn't running any bus service. And, if you've ever tried to get food during a pandemic and you don't have transportation,
right,
you're kind of stuck with options. And so just the ability to be able to walk out of your house and go to Norma G's, which is on the corridor, and still have a takeout option in your neighborhood, those are things that we tend to take for granted a little bit until we wind up in, a pandemic like this where you really value having the ability to just go 5 minutes up the street and have something in your neighborhood. The challenge that it does present is, on the retail, much like you've highlighted with Alma Kitchen, there is an apprehension from businesses to open in an environment like this where there's uncertainty about whether or not we'll be allowed to be open. What does operating at maximum capacity look like? Are we 50% occupancy? Are we 25% occupancy? Will I be doing as much retail revenue? So what I think it's caused us to do is have to be creative with saying, we know that the housing aspect of our plan is still solid. It's been validated as part of this plan. But now as we move forward with sort of our retail strategy and filling those storefront spaces, how do we pivot that plan to make sure that we're offering and prioritizing those basic services that will help people during this time period where we've got COVID and there's a need for those services versus just bringing in amenities, which are more non-essential services and really don't have an impact right now during the COVID. Mm-hmm. And then once we emerge, whether it's 2021, 2022, and there's some sense of what this looks like and what normal goes back to, then I think from there, we'll be able to start to fill in some of these missing pieces on the amenity side to make sure that we're activating those storefronts.
As someone who, navigated Jefferson East through like the 2008 fiscal collapse, right? I think one of the big mistakes back then was that we didn't have things teed up for the recovery that was to follow. And so everyone was hunkered down that the world was going to end. I remember burning liquor stores and everything like that. But what we should have been doing back in 2008 was acquiring property, putting together development plans, and teeing things up. And so having the master plan, having the community's vision articulated, and then having properties tied up and under EJ Devco's control allows us to, like, when we return to normal, and we will return to normal, we'll be able to hit the ground running and execute on that vision. And that is just so important to not lose sight of that, even during these dark and trying times.
From here, over the next several years, the plan will continue to remain a living plan. So, you'll see that the site, once it goes live, that site won't be static. We intentionally didn't make this one of those printed, 150-page books that, has really pretty pictures in it. And then we look at it for 6 months and it goes on the shelf. The idea here is, this is a living plan. It's a living document. The site is living. It will continue to be updated and continue to be refreshed as we engage with the community. And then we'll continue to implement as we go along in each of these phases to make sure, did we get it right as we look back? If we didn't, how do we make sure to continue to get it right as we move forward? And then lastly, I'll say the most important piece of this are inclusive neighborhood development principles, which is really what drives how this work is going to be done. And so those are things like, and I know we've talked about this before on this show, is local hiring, local contracting requirements, accessible price points. What are the affordability requirements? Over time, we will continue to refine those inclusive development principles from the community and then put tools in place to make sure that, the fears and the displacement pressures that residents are feeling, there are buffers and policy tools that we can put in place to make sure that we're trying to reduce and mitigate that impact of displacement happening to Detroit residents and Detroit businesses. When we talk about the G word, gentrification, everybody's afraid of it happening. And really, it can be either real or perceived for most individuals. And unfortunately, we tend to be more reactionary than we are proactionary in these moments of development. And so one of the things we want to do is make sure that with these inclusive development principles is say, how do we get ahead of some of these fears of displacement? How do we get ahead of some of these pressures that are sometimes inevitable with development as it happens, and make sure that we put things in place ahead of time to protect the existing residents, existing businesses, while not stopping development or growth from happening at the same time?
Well, we look forward to seeing how it all progresses and takes shape. Derric Scott of the EJ Devco and Josh Elling of Jefferson East. Great to have you on, as always, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys. Great to be on again.
That'll do it for today's Daily Detroit. Sven is on vacation in Pennsylvania the rest of this week. Well, at least he's not in Ohio. So you're stuck with me for the next few days. We're going to have some wonderful folks help us out with what to know and where to help around town. Tomorrow morning's show promises to be a busy one, and so does the rest of the week. With that, I am Jer Stays. Take care of each other. Don't forget your mask, and I will see you around Detroit.